Hello, everybody. This is Andy coming to you from the bunker, which is Clown World Chronicle Studios, which is my basement, really, which is technically speaking my mom's basement because I inherited her house after she passed away. So I'm coming to you from my mother's basement. Feel free to troll me in the comments, being a mom's basement dweller. But I wanted to do what I'm hoping will be a regular series on Sundays called Andy's Sermon, Pastor Andy's Sermons. And I wanted to start off by, I think I've done one before, but I want to do these more regularly. And it was inspired by this post by the Babylon Bee, not the Bee, the non-satirical wing of the Babylon Bee, where basically an MSNBC guest said, who the scary Christian nationalists. Check under your beds, boys and girls, for the scary Christian nationalists. But that Christian nationalists believe that rights come from God, not the government, and that this is different than what Christians believe. Which is funny to me because what the fuck would filthy, godless leftist commies know about what Christians believe? I mean, this is MSNBC. This is practically the communist wing of the Democratic Party. Like, what the fuck do they know about what Christians believe? They practically believe that Christians are evil and should be done away with. So what the fuck do they know? But it's also funny to me that they take this position considering just a few months ago, just before, when the Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade as bad jurisprudence, the leftists were screeching about how the Supreme Court had just taken away their rights, which is not a right. First of all, abortion is not a right. It's not written anywhere in the Constitution. But this is not a video about abortion. I am pro-choice myself. Feel free to troll me in the comments about that. But so yeah, there's this cognitive dissonance here where they insist that the government gives you your rights, but when the government takes away your rights, I'm using the air quotes right now, they start screeching. So I mean, they don't even understand their own hypocrisy, their own cognitive dissonance on this position. The government does not give you your rights. Okay, the government might enshrine your rights. They might codify your rights into law to protect your rights, but they do not hand them out. They are not theirs to hand out. There's a long, fuck it. Instead of me trying to explain it to you in some retarded way, because I'm not the most eloquent person on earth, why don't we watch a couple of videos and they can explain it better.
Human rights are the rights you have simply because you're human. It's how you instinctively expect and deserve to be treated as a person, like the right to live freely, to speak your mind, and to be treated as an equal. There are many kinds of rights. Most apply to a certain group. But human rights are the only ones that apply to absolutely everyone, everywhere. That means kids, old people, poor people, basketball players, garbage men, rappers, teachers, Africans, Indians, Albanians, Christians, Muslims, Kabbalists, atheists, your mom, your dad, your next door neighbor, and you all have the exact same human rights. In other words, they're universal. But the question remains, what are they?
Name the human rights?
What the human rights are?
The right
This is a typical montage of people not having a clue what the fuck human rights are.
to live,
equality between all peoples.
Right to religion, the right to...
Is there supposed to be a list somewhere I should be aware of?
According to the United Nations, there are a total of 30 human rights, which are usually lumped together and called simply human rights. They're all listed out in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is the world's most widely accepted document on the subject. But it was a long time in coming. At first, there were no human rights. If you were in with the right crowd, you were safe. If you weren't, well, you weren't. But then a guy named Cyrus the Great decided to change all that. After conquering Babylon, he did something completely revolutionary. He announced that all slaves were free to go. He also said people had the freedom to choose their religion, no matter what crowd they were a part of. They documented his words on a clay tablet known as the Cyrus Cylinder. And just like that, human rights were born. The idea spread quickly to Greece, to India, and eventually to Rome. They noticed that people naturally followed certain laws, even if they weren't told to. They called this natural law, but it kept getting trampled on by those in power. Not until
Please keep that in mind, that trampling by those in power, it's a very salient point to this concept, this idea that we were going to hash out later.
1,000 years later in England, did they finally get a king to agree that no one can overrule the rights of the people, not even a king. People's rights were finally recognized, and they were now safe from those in power. Kind of. It still took a bunch of British rebels declaring their independence before the king got the point that all men are created equal. Which isn't to say he liked the idea, but he couldn't stop them, and America was born. The French immediately followed with their own revolution for their own rights. Their list was even longer, and they insisted that these rights weren't just made up. They were natural. The Roman concept of natural law had become natural rights. Unfortunately, not everyone.
All right, that's enough of that video. I'd like to play you another short video. It's only a couple of minutes that kind of expands on the Greek and Roman contribution to this whole thing, because she kind of skipped over that. It was only very brief mention of the Greeks and the Romans. And as they are, the founders of Western civilization, I think it's important to just learn a little bit more about that.
Foundations of human rights may be traced back to 4th century Greece in an ancient Greek school of Stoic philosophy, founded by Zeno of Citium. Stoicism taught of a natural law that people naturally followed. Stoicism said that all men are fundamentally equal, as there is a universal force at work throughout all of creation, and human behavior should thus follow the law of nature. We can see examples of this in ancient Greece's literature, such as the story of Antigone, who was criticized by Creon for burying her slain brother against his orders, and her declaring that she acted in accordance with the immutable laws of the gods. Romans borrowed these ideas, and the Roman jurist Ulpian allowed enforcement of certain universal rights that were for everyone, even those who weren't Roman citizens. The Romans also assumed a system entitled humanitas, which can be related to human rights, because it concentrated on an educated society to do good, and was against violence towards any other human being.
All right, so that is a brief explanation of the progress of developing and enshrining into law human rights, obviously with the modern adoption of the Human Rights Declaration by the UN, which spells out the 30 or so human rights that are afforded to everybody. But these were things that were developed over the millennia by the founders of our civilization. Yes, they were, some of them were governments that enshrined these things into law, but they did not come from the government. They came from the conflict that arises between competing interests. For example, the most important example of human rights is the Magna Carta. And the Magna Carta was basically the pressure that the noblemen put on the king to prevent them from being mistreated by the king. It wasn't something that the king just, magnanimously just granted the noblemen. They pressured him. And from the Magna Carta, of many of the rights that commoners as we would be called by, the people back then, commoners derived their rights from, like habeas corpus, the right to a fair trial, the right to not have unreasonable search and seizure. All these different rights that emanate from the Magna Carta was basically a campaign by the noblemen against the king to prevent the king from mistreating them. Rights are, in the philosophical sense, this natural law that all men are equal. That's derived from philosophers. It's not derived from the government being magnanimous towards its subjects. These rights are enacted to protect the citizen from the fucking government. I mean, we're 4 years out from the fiasco that just happened with the COVID pandemic, where governments all over the world were trampling on the rights that they have sworn to protect when they take office. I mean, most lawmakers in Canada, in the States, in many democracies around the world swear an oath to protect the Constitution when they take their oath of office. And the very first fucking thing they did was to trample on the Constitution and the rights that are enshrined within. So the government does not grant rights. No, they are not granted from the government. Human rights, the rights enshrined in constitutions, are to protect the governed from the government. I mean, the people who shriek about Nazi this and Nazi that and authoritarianism are turning around and saying, no, your rights aren't derived from God or from natural law. No, the government bestows you those fucking rights. And this is what I'm talking about, the cognitive dissonance of leftists. Like when they shoots them, they will trot out the horrors of Nazism and all the terrible things that were done by the Nazis. But the minute it shoots them, it's like, nah, God didn't give you those rights. Those rights were given to you by the government. And I mean, it's not surprising. They're filthy, godless communists. And one of their goals is to destroy religion and to destroy the family. So it's not surprising, but their position is completely hypocritical. And yes, rights are its natural law. It's a tradition that comes from Europe. Europe is a Christian continent. It's a Christian civilization, whether you like it or not. The people who sailed to Europe, to North America, were fleeing persecution from the government. I mean, it's taught in school, for fuck's sakes. The Puritans. I mean, have you forgotten what you learned in school? They were fleeing persecution. The founding fathers were, they declared independence to escape the oppression of the government. I mean, this is why they drafted the Bill of Rights in such a way to protect the future citizens of America from the government. And we have been slowly trampling on the Constitution. Well, not we, the government has been slowly trampling on the Constitution with, the Patriot Act and all the other things that they've done in the name of safety. And so, yes, the government is the thing that we should be protected from, because governments have killed over 250 million people in just the last century alone. With the start of World War I, which was a conflict that was started by three interbred monarchs that didn't need to happen, with the imposition of the Versailles Treaty on Germany, which was very unfair, very, very inequitable. Germany hadn't lost World War I; it was a stalemate. And even famous leftists like Keynes, the economist. Keynes said this would backfire, and it did. Started World War II, killed another 50, 60 million. Then the communists slaughtered 100 million people. Governments have been slaughtering people like it's going out of fucking style. And human rights are a tool to prevent the government from excuse me, I had to cough, from trampling on the rights of their citizens, like we have seen in the last 4 years, where if you didn't, if you didn't shut down your business, you were likely to be arrested. You couldn't take a walk by yourself on the beach. You remember that image of the guy being swarmed by like 5 cops because he had the temerity to walk on the beach by himself. I mean, you remember these things. They just fucking happened. You remember where, the liquor stores were allowed to open, but churches weren't. You remember that. You remember when they said, nah, you won't be forced to take the shot, but then they, a few months later, yeah, you can't go to work if you're not vaccinated. So human rights are not something that the government grants you. The government will do everything in its fucking power to trample on your rights. If they come from God, if they come from natural law, I don't know where they come from, but great thinkers throughout the ages have all known that these are not rights granted to you by the government, because the government is prone to attract the psychopaths who have a lust for power and will do everything they can to stay in power, whether that means slaughtering tens of millions of people or throwing you in jail or all manner of heinous shit. So let's get this fucking straight. Human rights are the protection against government. Power should be diffuse. Too much power. I mean, have you learned nothing from the Lord of the Rings? Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts. Abso-fucking-lutely. And that's what human rights are there for. It's check and balance against the power of the state to mistreat you, you fucking imbeciles. And this is why I always say everything the left says is a fucking lie, because they're fucking sociopaths. Leftists are fucking sociopaths. Trust me, I used to be in among them years and years ago before I realized what kind of fucking scary people they are. Anyways, this concludes the sermon. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.